Hello, everybody, and welcome to Encounters USA with author Matthew Heines. If you're looking for alien incidents, Bigfoot brouhahas, or Dogman dealings, we have the podcast interviews, field research, and field interviews you're gonna love. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and check us out on Patreon. Now, on with the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Encounters USA. And it is 2020. Yahoo! I hope everybody had a great New Year, and I hope you had a great Christmas. In case you hadn't noticed, the past couple weeks, I have been kind of on a hiatus. I started this podcast in April, the end of April in 2019, and I didn't take a break from the time it started until Christmas. So I took a much-deserved break, and now I'm back and hopefully ready for more action. Now, we have been focusing a lot the past month or two on the topic of Bigfoot. But now we are going to shift gears a little bit. We still have a Bigfoot show coming up, two Bigfoot shows coming up this month. On Tuesday, I'll be airing our I Actually Saw Bigfoot podcast, where we have Todd Nice, we have Todd Nice, excuse me. I always get that wrong. I'm sorry, Todd. We also have Jay Birch, Amy Bew, and of course, the legendary Ron Moorhead. So it'll be a great discussion, and we're going to talk about the issue of people who see Bigfoot versus the people who don't see Bigfoot, and what their specific value is. And if you want to know more, just listen to the podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. So today we are switching gears, and we are going over to talk about the alien side of our podcast. Now, we haven't really done a lot with aliens. I would like to get a lot more alien abductees, alien researchers, and people who write books about the topic of aliens. But we have been, being in the Northwest, we've just been so bogged down almost with just there's so much information about Bigfoot. And also, when you talk about the topic of the alien and UFO subject, there's a lot going on in that world that we need to talk about, and it's a totally separate entity than what we're talking about today. So today we're going to be talking about, aliens. And you can't really talk about aliens or look into the subject of aliens without discussing the topic of, have they ever tried to communicate with us? And if you watch YouTube or you look around on YouTube, you are going to see quite a few things that may or may not apply to this. Now, some of the things that you might have looked at are, if you're interested in the subject, are crop circles. People say that those are alien communications. People who have been abducted say that they've had communications with aliens. And then there are actual aliens that people supposedly talk to. And today we're going to be discussing one particular episode or thing that is on YouTube. It's a video, and actually it's been copied a lot. It's got thousands and thousands of views, but this is a purported interview with an alien that crashed at Roswell in 1947. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, because we want to talk about, in our future shows, we want to talk about the alien topic as it relates to aliens communicating with us, because you can study UFOs and say, oh, I saw lights in the sky is all you want. But until you actually dig up and find alien communications, then I think that it's just a lot of redundancy, because it's who's inside those craft and why they're here and what their mission is that's important. And so when we look at this particular interview, this is an interview with an alien that supposedly crashed at Roswell. This is way more information than I particularly have ever seen coming from a supposed alien source. And as you're going to see, the information that you're going to hear may really startle you. It may really shake you to your very foundation. And you have to choose yourself whether or not to accept it. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going over the main points of what this alien purportedly told this person during an interview, and I'm going to discuss how it was set up, who the person was, et cetera, in a minute. But the alien gave this information to this person, and it is something that you may or may not have ever heard before, but what you're going to hear could possibly be the reason for them not wanting to let this information out and let people know what is really going on out in the galaxy around us. So the reason that this is important for Encounters USA is because we are going to be talking to as I said, we were going to look at alien abductees. We're going to look at people who have researched the topic, and we're going to be looking at other segments of alien communications, and that also includes remote viewers. So I'm going to use remote viewing to check on some of the information from at least here. And so if you follow Encounters USA, you'll want to, pay attention to this, because we're going to be following up with remote viewers and what other people have said about the same topics that apply to things like the history of the galaxy. All right, so here is the setup. In 1947, we all know, we've heard it so many times, it's almost nauseating to listen to, but there was a crash in Roswell. Now, out of that crash, according to what's going on here, and I'm not going to keep saying according to, but I just hope we will all accept the fact that the information I'm giving you is not from me, it's from this reported interview. So it's not me saying this, but I don't want to keep saying allegedly, et cetera, or according to. So 1947, Roswell crash, there's an alien that survived. The alien refused to speak with anybody. And there was a nurse on duty, a 23-year-old nurse, and her name was Matilda O'Donnell McElroy. And I sure hope I got that name right. But her name is Matilda O'Donnell, and then later she got married and became Matilda O'Donnell McElroy. She's a 23-year-old nurse, and she is assigned to, I think, give first aid, whatever, to this alien. And for the first time, the alien begins to communicate with her. So that's the setup. Now, it's 1947, and before we continue on, we need to look at what's also going on in the UFO and alien world. Because in June, remember, this is actually July. These interviews go on through the second and third week of July. In the first week of July in Maury Island in Washington State, a UFO dropped a bunch of slag or whatever on a boat that was owned by a guy named Chrisman, and this whole situation with this UFO encounter and this guy getting this slag dropped onto him ended up involving Kenneth Palmer, who was the first guy who saw UFOs over Rainier. It involved a couple of Air Force officers that ended up dead. It involved Guy Bannister, who ended up being key in the JFK assassination, and a whole lot of weird stuff happened and is going on at the same time that this is happening in Roswell, where they have a live alien that they are interviewing. And I almost said allegedly. So, but they are interviewing this person. So, the last thing that I want to point out to you is that this is right before, or it's during, the transition of the Air Force from the United States Army Air Force to the U.S. Air Force. So no longer under control of the Army, but as soon as this stuff starts happening, they switch over, and the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, becomes its own Air Force. So now that we have the setup, we have a 23-year-old nurse who doesn't really have any idea what's going on. We have an alien that has survived a crash, and we have some elements of Majestic 12 have already arrived, and they want to be involved with this alien. So when she starts to get communications from the alien, they want her to start asking questions. So this is what happened. Now, the first thing that they needed to establish was a way to communicate with each other. And what was happening at first is the alien was just giving mental pictures to this nurse, and then she would relate the information to, I guess they would have somebody recording this stuff as she was speaking. And I guess I should explain the setup. According to the story, they came in overnight. They built basically an interview room. It had the one-way glass. They had all of the, like these Majestic 12 guys watching from the glass. They had researchers, et cetera, et cetera. And before that, she started talking to this alien. They had a yogi, like from India, had come in, and the alien didn't like that person at all. And another psychic came in, and the alien wouldn't talk to them. The only person the alien would communicate with was this nurse. So she is tasked with communicating with the alien. And at first, what they do is they she's shown mental pictures from the alien, which explains the situation, that what they're doing here, how they crashed, etc. And the alien describes burning clouds that would have been the atomic testing. And she said the alien turns out to be named Errol, and says that their craft crashed because they were hit by lightning. And so she said that she's an officer, and the people under her, they died. Now, we're going to talk about what this Errol, this alien, actually is in a minute. But I just want to point out to you very briefly that there's a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go over it. I'll leave the links to it in the description on YouTube. But there's a lot of information here that some I think is important and some is not, and I'm trying to squeeze it into a interesting hour podcast. So I can't go into everything that she talked about, but I just want to tell you how she was able to communicate. Now, how she was able to communicate was she took a McGuffey's reader from the frontier days, and the nurse read to this alien and pointed at the words and sounded out the sounds. So pretty soon the alien was able to understand the alphabet and then started reading on its own or her own, and then started requesting all of these books. So now the alien is starting to pick up all this information. Now, at the same time that this alien is picking up this information, it also appears to be communicating with a base that is out in the asteroid belt, which the alien says is part of a destroyed planet. And they use that base because it has less gravity, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyway, before I continue, there's a lot of information here, and I encourage you to listen to the entire podcast on YouTube by yourself and make your own decisions and come up with your own conclusions. There is just so much information here. All right. So, what I should point out also is that during the whole time of this interview, the military, and we'll talk about at the end who all is involved here, but it's pretty amazing, But the military wants this nurse, 23-year-old nurse, to go in and ask this alien questions. The alien never answered one question that the military wanted her to answer. What it turns into is basically a lecture on history of not only the history of the Earth, but of also the history of the entities that these people are. And so it really, if you're listening on YouTube, it kind of gets very dry. But if you listen to the substance of it, it actually is very amazing and almost to the point of being fantastical, which is what would be the easiest way to classify this and accept this information. So, just to reiterate, the alien is a female, about 4.5 feet tall. Its name is Errol. And it explains to the officer or the nurse that the alien is occupying a body that she refers to as a doll body, that it's not real, that her spirit, that this real person is back in the middle of the galaxy, in a place called the Domain. So let's talk about the Domain, the Old Empire, and the ISB. All right. Now, as I said, the alien is a 40-inch officer that is from the center of the galaxy. Now, this officer refers to her, who she comes from, who she represents, who she works for. They are called the Domain. Now, the Domain is a relative newcomer to the galaxy, although when this entity said its age, it was said it was trillions of years old. Does that make any sense? Well, it might in a little bit. Okay. Now, the Domain, who this officer works for, is at odds with an entity called the Old Empire. Now, the Old Empire and the Domain have got specific philosophical differences. So let's talk about these philosophical differences. The Old Empire and the Domain are different because the Old Empire believes that or is practicing a form of slavery, of captivity, and the Earth is what they would call a prison planet. And what this means is that the people who inhabit the earth, you and I, we are what is called an ISB. We are, as in is, he is, she is, and we are also a being. We are becoming, right? So we are never situated in one state. We are always in the act of becoming something else. And we are billions and billions of years old. Each one of us human beings is an ISB, and we are trapped on the earth, on this planet, by the old empire. Now, the difference between the old empire and the domain is that the old empire is basically social, political, and economic slavery, and it's all based upon amnesia. They don't want the ISBs, which are us, to understand who we are, where we came from, and how if we all were to unite against this old empire, that we could throw them off and that we could rule ourselves and be more like, I guess, the domain people. Now, before you run off and say, oh, well, that sounds like a great thing to do, I want to point out one thing, and that is that this Errol is a doll, and she never once explained where her real body is, where her real being is. She said that she is basically remote controlling this doll body from somewhere in the middle of the galaxy. So what is her body? Is her body in a jar someplace or something? So before we got too excited about the great ideas of the domain, I would want to wonder where her body was, but I guess that's just me. So the old empire got us in captivity. And basically the difference between us, according to this Errol, is that the old empire is comparable to like Nazi Germany. They were brutal and ruthless, and we basically don't want any part of them, but they control us, and they are the ones that set up the systems that we see around us. And that includes our social, political, and economic slavery, and all is based upon scarcity and upon the amnesia, the forgetting of what we learned, what we had, and what we did in the past life before we went into this one. So how is this achieved? How is this amnesia achieved when we die? Now, according to Errol, when you die, your spirit leaves your body, your ISB, but there is like a net around the earth. And so your spirit can't really leave the body. It is captured, it is electrocuted, and then it is sent back into another body where it's electrocuted so that it can't remember anything that happened in the previous life. So everything it learned, everything it was, everybody it knew, it wouldn't have any idea of any of that stuff. However, some people might argue that people who believe in reincarnation and talk about being part of a past life, they might have something there to back that up. The military wanted this nurse to get information from this entity. The entity would not give any information that the military officers wanted. Instead, it gave a list or a series of lectures to this young nurse. And so I'm going to go over some of the highlights of this history lecture. I missed some, and I encourage you to listen and make more sense of this. I tried to include the things that kind of tie in together and things that you could relate to. So now, she says that human beings have been around for trillions of years. The planet Earth is not originally the home of any ISB or spirit or soul. Everybody that's here now was brought here from another planet, from other galaxies, or from other planets. And that even now they are still bringing these souls in here to be dropped off. And what kind of souls are being dropped off here, etc. We're going to talk about in a minute. Now, according to the history of the domain, which this is the history that is important to the domain, in about 3500 BC, they put a base in the Himalayas. And somehow the old empire, they didn't know the old empire was around here. Now, the thing about the Earth and our solar system, we're so far out in the galaxy that nobody really cares about us. The only thing they care about, according to the space person, the alien, is they care about that base they have out on the asteroid belt because of its low gravity. They also say they have a base on the moon. But when they put in this base on the Himalayas, the people from Mars, the old empire came and attacked them immediately. They captured them, they killed them, and they electrocuted them, and they kept them in the recycle mode on the planet Earth with the rest of us. So the domain sent a lot of people, or a few people, out to look for these. And one of the missions or jobs that Errol had was to come out and try to find these people. Now, according to the story that Errol tells, these people show up, these domain entities that are continually recirculating, they show up as different people. Like Suleiman II of the Ottoman Empire was supposedly married to Queen Elizabeth, and at the same time, that's why she was a virgin queen, because she was married to Suleiman the Magnificent, and they were these domain people that apparently remembered who they were. So stuff like that is going on, and some prominent people like Tesla and Edison, people, inventors, people that had ideas, got those ideas because they were able to tap into the knowledge of the domain. Now, around 1150, the domain, for some reason, people started getting this knowledge from the domain, 1150 AD. So about the time of the First Crusade, there was this knowledge of science and an advancement in learning, et cetera, et cetera. The Vedas of the Hindus, which are reportedly thousands of years old, these were folk tales that were told to the local inhabitants by the domain from this base that was attacked by the old empire. Now, the alien considered that the children of Israel, who they said were constantly interacting with elements of the old empire, they didn't understand the technology of things that they were seeing. But they were interacting with the old empire. Now, the alien goes on to say that the old empire really specializes in these monolithic cultures, these megaliths, these huge stones, pyramids, Stonehenge, etc. Because what they're trying to do is to portray their philosophy of their permanence compared to the domain's philosophy of the permanence of the spirit and the freedom of the spirit. So they use these monoliths, the pyramids, the things in South America, etc., to not only enslave the Isbis and make them do forced work and have horrible lives, but they also use them to present an illusion of permanence, that this is always going to be here, but your spirit is nothing. But when it's actually the opposite. So when you look at the pyramids and the monoliths and megaliths, according to this interview, that's the reason for this, so that the old empire could portray an idea of permanence. And we also see that in banks, in these solid banks and churches, cathedrals, etc. Since the Middle Ages. Now, going back in history about 70,000 years, the cities of Atlantis and Lemuria, which was a continent in the Pacific, existed at the same time. The Asians, the Chinese, are direct descendants of the Lemurians. Now, the alien seems to be wishy-washy. There either was a cataclysmic volcanic eruption that destroyed basically the continental shelf. It sunk into the ocean, or they not the Atlanteans, but the Lemurians could possibly have been an outlaw religious cult. And in the Old Empire, illegal colonization and not paying your taxes is a definite no-no. So this is some of the history of the universe, of the Earth, of the galaxy, according to this alien. Now, I should also point out that the nurse who gave the alien this information gave them the Bible and a few of these other books like the Vedas, etc., and really had no comment other that the children of Israel did not understand what it was that they were seeing or interacting with. When it came to modern history, and as this interview is going on, there are a lot of other things that are interjected here, a lot of other ideas, and so it tends to be kind of a rambling on here, talking about this, talking about that. And so I really am trying to pick and choose the right topics and organize them. And for example, when they talked about the fate of Lemuria and Atlantis and, having two fates for them, that kind of makes it a little bit confusing as to what really happened. So maybe we would need to look at that a little bit more. But as far as modern history, the alien explained, for example, that Pearl Harbor, the aliens somehow knew that they brought the ships back into Pearl Harbor. They actually had them store their ammunition below decks where the torpedoes from the Japanese planes were going to be coming. They actually had them store their ammunition below decks so that the Japanese could come in and kill and murder a whole bunch of people. And she said that's just how things are done on the planet Earth. And what is unique about the planet Earth, this alien says that the races are never put together like they are on the planet Earth. No planet, according to this alien, has so many different races. And the people that are here, or at least some of the souls that are here, are those who are degenerates. They're criminals. They're mass murderers from other systems that they just don't want. And so they are reincarnating them here and letting us deal with them. There are also a number of poets, leaders, that are also not acceptable in the old empire. So this is what happened to a lot of the people who supposedly are on the earth, is that they were brought here from another place, and that they don't know why we don't know why we're here. And the whole thing, the whole establishment, everything is set up so that we will be poor, we will be ignorant and forgetful of what we were and who we are. And we are basically just put here to do manual labor for these other Old Dominion people. Now, what happened after all of this stuff was done? So, after all of these lectures by this alien about how our history is wrong, about how the domain is so good, about how the old empire is so evil, about what is really going on, about the Isbies and the captivity and the electrocution and the amnesia and the reincarnation and the prison planet, etc., etc. The Air Force finally, I guess, got fed up. And according to MATILDA MCELROY, she went into a meeting, and in that meeting she could not believe General Curtis LeMay was there. Charles Lindbergh was there. The entire Majestic 12 staff, from Twining to Hohenkotler to all of them, were in the room. And they told her to go into that room with the information that they had transcribed from all the notes that they had taken, go in and have this alien sign off on it. And the nurse, 23 years old, she sees these people she's only seen on newsreels and, newsreels. They didn't even have TV. Well, she goes back to the alien, and the alien says no. She says, do your commanders not trust you? Do they have that little control over you that they can't accept something that you have given them? I will not sign anything. And she refused to do anything. So what happened next is the craziest thing of all. As soon as the nurse got up to leave, in came 4 people. They came in with this apparatus. Actually, 5 people came in. 2 of them grabbed the alien and sat it down in the chair. A 5th person put a headband around the alien's head. 2 more people held down the nurse so that she couldn't move, and she watched as they administered what? Electroshocks to the alien's head. They did this for a number of times, and then finally, MATILDA MCELROY was told to leave the room. After she left the room, she was submitted to a number of lie detector and tests involving sodium pentothal or truth serum to see whether or not she was lying. Now, through this all, it was all to see if the alien or if MATILDA MCELROY was making all of this stuff up. So it was an amazing turn of events. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about as far as MATILDA MCELROY is her unique discharge. Once it was determined that she was telling the truth, she was immediately discharged with an honorable discharge. She was given a military retirement, a pension. After she couldn't have been in the military more than a year or so, she was given a full pension, and she was sworn to secrecy that if she ever talked about any of this stuff, that she would be killed. So how did this stuff get into anybody's hands? Well, the story is on the YouTube video, and it was basically mailed to a researcher in a series of documents. How was she able to hang on to this material? According to her story, they never asked her for the notes. She said she kept them under her bed every day for safekeeping. And when it was all said and done, the military had their own notes. They didn't know that she had those. So she kept them until she was on her deathbed, and then she came forward and said that she wanted to disclose this information so that people knew what went on. So that is the story of Matilda O'Donnell McElroy's interview with an alien. Now, if you believe it or not, or if you have any comments, or if you have any other information, leave your comments in the description below. But I just want to go over for a minute some of the claims that the alien, made. And just to point out, because if this alien has this grasp of history, et cetera, then the information that they have will be correct, right? Well, she did make a mistake there was a point where she was talking about the king Darius being Muslim. And Islam didn't come around until 600 AD, and Darius was about 500 BC. So there was an obvious disconnect there. And I don't know, I don't know why that is, but there was a disconnect there. Now, as far as the technology, remember, this supposedly happened in 1947. And then it appeared on YouTube, who knows, 2008, 2010, etc. So obviously 60 years later on. So anybody who was faking this would have to be very careful about the technology that they talk about in the interview. Now, in the interview, they talk about the computer. But when they talk about the computer, the alien does. The alien has to describe the computer to the nurse. So I think that is that's very, it's okay. It syncs with the time period. One thing that I really found fascinating was the lack of a religious a comment on any religion, other than to say that ISBs, us, are all capable of being God ourselves. And there was no discussion of God, of a higher power. It was just that we're all that higher power. We're all God. So that was the only part of the issue of philosophy or religion that the ISB talked about, was just the nature of the soul and what they called the ISB. So then, with so much knowledge, and remember this thing said it was trillions of years old, so it would know about a lot of different places and a lot of different things. So there were a couple of things that were almost humorous that they talked about. And one of them was the idea of science and biology. And had this thing not talked about science and biology, I would not really have given it any thought. And the story it told is so outlandish that it might actually be true. I don't know. But anyway, they say that there was a company that when they wanted to start to populate these planets, they, terraforming, there were different companies, and they're out just like in our world, competing, bidding on projects, et cetera, doing research. And there was a company that this alien worked for called Bugs and Blossoms. And they had patented a way, they had figured out a way. And this is before DNA was discovered in 57. Crick and Watson got the Nobel Prize. So 55, I guess, was DNA. So before DNA, they're talking about how they engineer flowers and reproductive systems, and how the bugs are dependent on the blossoms, et cetera, et cetera. But then they said that there were other issues that were going on, that in some cases they had to keep buying new bodies to be inhabited. So then things were made like it was decided that some species would eat other species. And while at the beginning, it was just everything was got its energy from the sun, either from eating plants or directly from the sun. But then it came, well, no, we need to have species eating other species to survive. So that created this, the world that we have now. And that when, and I'm just extrapolating here, but when these things are coming around doing genetic experiments, mutilating cows, whatever, they probably are producing something or doing something for some crazy company, according to this alien. But Bugs and Blossoms and talking about trade shows and using political leverage, it really is kind of comical. And it would be funny if that's actually the way that the universe works. So, what's our conclusion about the Errol interviews, the Matilda O'Donnell McElroy? Well, I believe that So what's our conclusion about the interview, about Errol, and about this almost crazy story told by Matilda O'Donnell McElroy? Well, the real judge of this has to be you. There is a lot of information here, a lot of it philosophical, a lot of it insanely out of this world, and a lot of it so much against what we believe. Yet somehow some of it almost makes sense. So it's really up to you, and you have to decide what you're going to believe and what kind of information that you want to accept. Now, in the future, we're going to come back and we're going to refer to this interview or this podcast. We're going to refer to this interview with the alien, and we're going to talk about some of the information that this alien put out, because we're also going to be talking about other alien interviews, and we're going to check the information that this alien has given to us. So I encourage you to go and check out this interview. I'll put the link to the longest video in the description. They've chopped it up into like 10 or 15 different segments, but you can watch the whole thing in 1 2-hour, rather dry episode. So it's an interesting listen. It's an interesting read because it's all written out as well. So I really encourage you to read this. It's some kind of information that, if it's true, if it's true, then something should be done about it. So this is the interview with the alien, at least our first alien. And I'm Matthew Heines for Encounters USA. So the next podcast you're going to see, our next episode, we're going to be looking at 4 people who really saw Bigfoot. And it's going to be a great, great podcast. And soon enough, we're going to get some remote viewers on here and start talking about things like the history of the galaxy, the history of the solar system, and some of these cosmic wars that this alien was talking about. So, whether you're out looking for Bigfoot or out in the solar system, watch out for that old empire or the domain, or heck, just always watch your back. Thanks for joining us on Encounters USA. Remember, if you have comments, please leave them in the comments section on YouTube and hit that subscribe button and ring that bell while you're at it. Don't forget, if you'd like to be a guest on Encounters USA, just send us an email at encountersusa1@gmail.com and just put podcast guest in the subject line. Now, please remember, that all of the guests' opinions on Encounters USA are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the podcast host nor the podcast sponsors. So thank you, and don't forget, when you're out in the woods looking for aliens, Bigfoot, or Dogman, always watch your back.